There are 38 films in the Godzilla franchise, so it's not surprising that there are countless scrapped projects during the series' lifespan. In fact, there are so many of these, I can't realistically go over every single abandoned Godzilla project, or else this video would very likely be several hours long. So instead, I'll be going over some of my all-time favorite cancelled Godzilla movies. These aren't necessarily ones that I think would be good, but rather ones that I find weird or interesting. I've always been intrigued by the concept of unmade movies in general. I love thinking about what could have been. Could these movies have been potential masterpieces or forgettable garbage? As a filmmaker myself, I've had projects of mine that made it all the way to the filming process only to get scrapped. I mean, my most recent feature film, Wayward Sons, was almost abandoned in the editing process. What I'm getting at is, this is a topic that fascinates me to no end. So, without wasting any more time, these are the lost Godzilla films that almost happened. Bride of Godzilla was the very first scrapped Godzilla project, and it was written in 1955 after Godzilla Raids Again, but before King Kong vs. Godzilla. The screenplay was written by Hideo Unagami, who would go on to create the story behind The H-Man, as well as act in other Toho films like Rodan and The Mysterians. Bride of Godzilla is an absolutely insane story. It includes mermaids and octopus people, as well as Anguirus. So, what's the story here? Well, this movie would have actually introduced the Hollow Earth storyline over half a century before the MonsterVerse ever did. Dr. Shida at the Godzilla Countermeasures Center suggests that both Godzilla and Anguirus emerged from a Hollow Earth cavern, and develops a giant humanoid robot, the Bride of Godzilla, to combat them. As Godzilla and other creatures re-emerge from the cavern, Shida downloads the memories of his human-like robot, Riko, into the Bride, leading to a climactic battle in which the Bride detonates a hydrogen bomb, killing both herself and Godzilla. Hideo Unagami's script for Bride of Godzilla intrigued Toho producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, but it was deemed too expensive and controversial to film. While elements of the story were adapted into Rodan and later The Return of Godzilla, the script was never produced. A 1978 rewrite abandoned the robot concept in Hollow Earth setting, instead featuring a female Godzilla and a remote island, but it still didn't materialize into a movie. Frankenstein vs. Godzilla was planned as a sequel of sorts to King Kong vs. Godzilla. The screenplay was written in 1963, with the idea being that the movie would be released in Japanese cinemas the following year. However, the plot wasn't all that great, so Toho scrapped it. But what was the film going to be about? The plot would have followed Dr. James Bowen, who discovers that a wild boy in Hiroshima is actually Frankenstein's monster, regenerated from a heart mutated by atomic radiation. As the creature rapidly grows and threatens human safety, the Japanese self-defense forces free Godzilla from ice, hoping the two will battle. The monsters clash near Mount Fuji, but their fight is cut short when volcanic fissures swallow Frankenstein and a flood sweeps Godzilla away, leaving his fate unknown. So, why was it cancelled? Well, there were some concerns about the plot's logic, with the Japanese self-defense forces using Godzilla to stop Frankenstein. This wouldn't make much sense since Godzilla is a bad guy, and why would the Japanese self-defense forces free him? It just made no sense. So instead they made Mothra vs. Godzilla. However, Toho revived the giant Frankenstein concept in 1965 for Frankenstein Conquers the World, or Frankenstein vs. Baragon. That, of course, was then followed by a loose sequel titled The War of the Gargantuas. While Batman and Godzilla have crossed paths in the recent comic crossover run of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong, they were supposed to meet in the mid-1960s, with Adam West starring as the Caped Crusader. This entire project would have been a massive crossover with that 1966 Batman TV show. From my understanding, the plot didn't include any big villains like the Joker or the Riddler, but would have featured an even bigger villain, Godzilla. The plot would have involved Barbara Gordon and her father encountering a tidal wave that was caused by Klaus Finster, a mad scientist in Japan threatening to destroy the country with a weather machine. Batman and Robin investigate and discover Finster is actually controlling Godzilla. After a series of battles, chases, and a close encounter with the giant beast, they knock Godzilla out with explosives and send him into space, forever trapping him in orbit. Ultimately, the film was scrapped around the same time the Adam West Batman TV show was cancelled in 1968. Godzilla vs. the Space Monsters Earth Defense Directive was supposed to be a 1972 movie that would have featured Godzilla, Anguirus, and a new monster named Majin Tool. The three monsters would be fighting against King Ghidorah, Gigan, and Megalon, who were all being controlled by an alien brain called Miko. The screenplay included a theme park with a Godzilla tower that Gigan mistook for the real Godzilla, a concept that would eventually be reworked and utilized in Godzilla vs. Gigan. While the film itself was never made, Megalon was later reworked for Godzilla vs. Megalon. Godzilla vs. Red Moon was a proposed collaboration between Toho Studios and Tsuburaya Productions. The film was planned for release between 1970 and 1973. It featured two new kaiju, Red Moon and Erebus, who turn out to be mates. After Erebus gives birth to Hafen, a businessman kidnaps the young kaiju, leading to its death. Enraged, Red Moon and Erebus rampage through Okinawa until Godzilla intervenes. He defeats the pair but spares Red Moon, who returns to space. Ultimately, the project was never completed and its elements remain unproduced. Godzilla vs. the Devil was a rumored late 1970s Godzilla film that never came to be. It was first mentioned in a 1978 fanzine as a $4 million collaboration between Toho and Henry G. Saperstein, but the project was ultimately denied by Godzilla creator Tomoyuki Tanaka in 1980. Whether or not this was an actual project that was really in development at Toho is unknown. The sources are kind of sketchy, and there isn't really much evidence to actually support its existence. However, the concept itself is pretty interesting, and elements of it can be seen in the 2015 graphic novel Godzilla in Hell. A Space Godzilla was a proposed film that would have very likely killed the Godzilla franchise while also being one of the best entries in the entire series. Let me explain. The story follows Godzilla, who is revealed to be an alien named Rozan, who is dying from a severe case of diabetes on the shores of Japan. Scientists transform Godzilla's body into a rocket and send her and her unborn child Lilin back to their home planet. There, Rozan and Lilin reunite with Kunin, and together they defend their planet from an alien race called the Tsunarians. I'm not making any of this up, this is a real movie that they were going to make in the 1970s. This screenplay would eventually get turned into a short story that actually got published, and some of the illustrations were actually by Katsuhiro Otomo, the director of the cyberpunk anime Akira. The most interesting aspect of this film, at least to me, is that the crew behind it were the same people behind House, which is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It's so insane, and I feel like that same energy would have been carried over here. I'm being 100% serious when I say that this movie would have been one of the best and weirdest Godzilla movies ever made. I honestly think it would make Godzilla vs. Hedorah look fairly normal in comparison. There are countless other scrapped Godzilla movies that I could talk about. However, I think I'm going to stop here. If you guys like this concept, then let me know down below in the comments if you want a part 2. I've already made individual YouTube shorts about some of these projects, and have also made an entire video about the scrap sequel to the TriStar Godzilla movie. So feel free to check those out as well. With all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media, and I will see you in the next one.